Imagine stealing millions of dollars meant to feed hungry children, and your punishment is just 6 months in jail.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear that and you think, there's no way, right? But federal prosecutors, they just revealed that up to half of $18 billion in Minnesota taxpayer funds might actually be
That is a
stolen.
lot.
Half. Think about that massive scale for a second. These fraudsters, they set up fake companies during the pandemic. They claimed to feed kids, but instead they took your money, the taxpayers' money, to buy luxury cars, expensive jewelry, foreign real estate.
Yeah, beachfront properties even.
Exactly. And now the Trump administration has frozen the funds. They literally deployed thousands of ICE agents to the state.
Right, Operation Metro Search.
Yeah, and conservative voters are just erupting in absolute outrage right now over federal judges handing out these incredibly light sentences to the criminals who pulled this off. So our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack all the sources we have, ranging from the federal court documents to conservative news reports. We want to understand exactly how this industrial-scale fraud happened under Governor Tim Walz, why the courtroom sentences are just infuriating taxpayers, and, how it triggered this massive federal crackdown.
Right, and I think to really understand why people are so incredibly angry about these light punishments, we first have to look at the staggering scale of the theft itself. I mean, the bureaucratic loopholes here made it incredibly easy to take this money.
So easy. So outline this for us. The center of this whole storm is a nonprofit group called Feeding Our Future, right?
Feeding Our Future.
Yeah.
It was headed by a woman named Amy Bach. And when the pandemic hit, the government obviously opened up emergency federal funding.
Sure.
The USDA issued these waivers to make sure kids still got meals when the schools were closed. But to do that, they removed the requirement that children actually eat the meals on site, and they allowed for bulk distribution.
Okay, so it was an emergency measure.
Exactly. They were prioritizing speed over security, which, is the fundamental friction in any government program. Systems designed to push out emergency aid quickly are just fundamentally at odds with the systems required to prevent fraud. And Amy Bach and her network, they just ruthlessly exploited that vulnerability. I mean, they didn't just inflate numbers a little bit. They fabricated entire operations out of thin air.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the indictments, and the methods they used to generate these fake rosters of children are just staggering.
Oh, it's wild.
We are talking about using random alphanumeric generators online, and in some cases they literally just submitted sequential numbers or names pulled directly from a website called listofsomalinames.com.
Unbelievable.
Right. How did state officials not stop this immediately when they saw people claiming to feed, I don't know, 6,000 kids a day at a single site?
Well, they bypassed the most basic data validation checks because the state just suspended them. Normally, an auditing system cross-references these rosters with school district enrollment data or requires Social Security numbers.
Right. Some kind of basic proof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the state agencies in Minnesota completely dropped those verification protocols. They created an environment where a single site could claim to feed 6,000 children a day.
Yeah.
And just to put that in perspective for you, feeding 6,000 kids requires a logistical operation on par with a military deployment.
Right.
You need dozens of semi-trucks, hundreds of staff, endless lines of people. Yet when the FBI agents finally surveilled one of these sites, they counted roughly 40 people showing up.
40 people. And out of the hundreds of millions funneled into this specific network, prosecutors estimate that only 3% actually went toward purchasing food.
Yeah, 3%.
3%. The remaining 97% just became a slush fund for a luxury lifestyle.
Absolutely.
The court documents list purchases like $64,000 Dodge Ram trucks, private villa honeymoons in the Maldives, and $30,000 shopping sprees for gold jewelry in Dubai. I mean, one defendant literally paid a proxy service to attend his online college classes for him using the stolen funds.
Yeah, it's the audacity of the spending that really highlights how little risk they felt. They felt totally untouchable. And, the single meal program is just a microcosm of a much larger systemic collapse.
How so?
Well, our sources show the state of Minnesota ran 14 high-risk Medicaid programs. This encompasses emergency housing, autism therapy, home health care. And these programs had a combined budget of $18 billion.
$18 billion.
Yeah,
And federal prosecutor Joe Thompson recently went on record estimating that half or more of that entire $18 billion budget was defrauded.
Yeah, he called it staggering industrial-scale fraud.
I mean, people were setting up fake companies on a Monday, providing zero real services, and billing the government for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fictitious autism therapy by Friday.
Exactly.
It's like leaving the bank vault wide open, walking away and putting up a sign that says, "Take what you need," doesn't even capture it. It is more like taking the bank vault doors off their hinges, removing the security cameras because the guards are afraid of bad optics, and just giving the robbers the Wi-Fi password.
That's exactly what it was like.
How does the bureaucratic apparatus of an entire state just watch this happen? I mean, I get emergency protocols, but when a brand new LLC claims to be housing hundreds of people overnight, how does an auditor not just drive over there and verify the building even exists?
Well, the explanation really lies in the internal culture of the agencies overseeing these funds. Governor Tim Walz recently characterized his administration's oversight by admitting they had a, quote, culture of being a little too trusting.
A little too trusting.
Yeah, but the nonpartisan state legislative auditor's report paints a far more troubling picture. It describes bureaucratic inertia driven by political fear. State officials were reportedly just terrified of being labeled racist or discriminatory.
And Amy Bach frequently weaponized that fear, right?
Constantly.
Whenever the state delayed a payment or asked for documentation, Bach's organization threatened to sue for discrimination. They claimed the state was deliberately targeting minority-owned businesses.
Right, and a former state fraud investigator, who happens to be Somali-American himself, by the way, went on record stating that this fear of political backlash entirely paralyzed the state's regulatory arm.
Wow.
The auditors and investigators were basically discouraged from aggressively pursuing the fraud allegations.
Okay.
And this dynamic is a massive focal point in conservative media right now.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
The prevailing argument there is that when a government bureaucracy prioritizes political correctness over basic fiduciary duty, the taxpayers are the ones left footing the bill. The agencies were so focused on avoiding bad press that they essentially facilitated the largest pandemic fraud case in the country.
So because this fraud was so easy to commit, essentially just filing fake paperwork, the justice system seems completely unprepared to treat it like the massive heist it actually is.
That's the real kicker.
Right. The criminals stole the money. The government finally caught them. But the outrage exploding online right now isn't just about the theft. It is about the absolute whiplash of what is happening in the courtroom.
Yeah, the sentencing phase is where the abstract concept of justice actually meets reality. It dictates the societal standard for accountability.
Right.
And when the punishment completely fails to match the severity of the crime, it just fractures public trust in the entire legal framework.
And we are seeing massive backlash from conservative outlets like the Western Journal regarding these incredibly light sentences. The irony here is that the judge handing down these sentences, Judge Nancy Brasel, is actually a Trump appointee.
Right.
Yet conservative voters are absolutely furious with her decisions. And when you look at the specific statistics, it is impossible not to see why. Let's look at Zamzam Gemma. She pled guilty to stealing $5 million.
$5 million.
She used your taxpayer money to buy a house and a car. Her sentence, just 6 months in jail.
6 months for a $5 million theft is just an anomaly in almost any other context.
Right.
And then consider the case of Abdul Abubakar Ali. He created a fake charity called Youth Investors Lab. He stole $3 million and never fed a single child.
Not one.
Not one. Federal sentencing guidelines suggested a penalty of roughly 2.5 years in prison for his crimes.
Which already feels light for $3 million.
Exactly. But Judge Brasel departed from those guidelines and slapped him with a sentence of just 1 year and 1 day.
1 year. And we cannot skip over Lubin Alishire. He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. After he was caught, the judge actually granted him permission to travel to Kenya for 30 days.
Yeah, this part is just mind-blowing.
He told the court he needed to leave the country to go sell the luxury properties he had purchased with the stolen money, supposedly to help pay restitution.
Right.
The prosecution warned that he was a massive flight risk, obviously, and might never return. Yet the court still allowed him to board an international flight.
I know.
Wait, let's stop and look at this from the perspective of just an average citizen. If you rob a convenience store with a weapon and take $100, you get years in federal prison, potentially a decade. You steal $3 million from taxpayers using a laptop and you get 1 year. How does the justice system justify this? Does white-collar crime get a remorse discount that street-level crime doesn't?
You're hitting on a structural mechanism in the criminal justice system there.
Mm.
Judge Brasel justified these downward departures by citing things like genuine remorse and early cooperation.
Genuine remorse.
Right. In the federal system, there is a legal mechanism known as a 5K 1.1 motion.
Okay.
It allows a judge to reduce a sentence if a defendant provides substantial assistance in prosecuting others. So Abdul Abubakar Ali, for instance, turned over evidence that helped indict his co-conspirators. The justice system is essentially trading leniency for efficiency. They want to roll up the smaller players to catch the kingpins.
But saying I'm sorry and handing over an Excel spreadsheet of your accomplices after you get caught stealing millions, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like a negotiated settlement.
And that is exactly the core of the conservative argument being amplified right now. Prominent right-wing figures are pointing out that these slaps on the wrist, they don't deter crime at all.
No, of course not.
They actively incentivize it. It transforms the criminal justice system into a simple risk-reward calculation.
It just becomes a business expense. If the worst-case scenario is spending a year in a minimum security facility and you potentially get to hide or keep a fraction of the millions you stole, the financial incentive to commit the fraud remains overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, and we're already seeing the geographical consequences of those perverse incentives. Prosecutors have officially stated that Minnesota is attracting what they call fraud tourists.
Fraud tourists?
Yeah, they recently indicted 2 men from Pennsylvania who literally traveled to Minnesota for the sole purpose of setting up fake companies to siphon housing funds.
What?
They identified the state's regulatory environment and these lenient judicial outcomes as basically an open invitation. When the government signals that stealing public funds carries less risk than traditional theft, criminal enterprises will naturally just migrate to that jurisdiction.
So the state system failed to protect the vault. The justice system effectively handed out wrist slaps. And as a direct result, we are now seeing the federal government step in with a highly aggressive,
A single vote in the
heavy-handed
U.S.
approach.
Senate can freeze the most
The
powerful
scale
government
has
on
shifted
earth.
from a
But
state-level
right now,
auditing failure
a political
to a massive
standoff
federal
threatens
intervention.
to blow up the rules
and the
forever.
escalation
Yeah,
at the
we
federal
are
level
watching
is
the
being
fundamental
driven by the
machinery of
specific
American
demographics and the
lawmaking
geography
just
of where the
grind
stolen
to
money
an
actually ended
absolute
up.
halt.
Right.
And
This
honestly,
is not
the
a
physical
localized
toll on the
embezzlement
people
scheme
inside
where the
that
funds were
building
kept
is about
within
to
the
become
local
very
economy.
real. No, according
Right,
to the
so
U.S.
let's set the
Attorney's
scene.
Office,
It's March
82
2026.
out of the 92
Picture the
indicted
hallways of the United
suspects
States
in
Capitol
these related
right now.
fraud cases
Aides
are
are
Somali
literally
Americans.
dragging
And a
military-style
massive
cots
portion of the
into
defrauded
back
taxpayer
offices.
money left
yeah.
the United States
Staffers are
entirely.
stockpiling
Millions
energy
of
drinks by the
dollars.
case.
Millions
Exactly.
of dollars were
We're
wired
looking at a
overseas
scenario
through
where
these
senators might
complex
actively
international
refuse
networks.
to drink
Yeah.
water. Prosecutors
Just so they don't
traced
have
the
to leave the
funds
floor to use
and
the
discovered the
restroom.
Which is
fraudsters were
wild,
purchasing
and
real
it's all
estate
because
in
the Senate
Nairobi,
is
Kenya.
completely deadlocked
They were buying
over the
coastal
Save It
properties in
America
Turkey
Act.
Right, that
and
big
acquiring
election
luxury
overhaul bill
jewelry
Yeah.
in
in
Dubai. Centered around
That's
measures like
crazy.
voter
Morphed
ID
into
requirements.
international money
Democrats were
laundering
aggressively
operation.
blocking this legislation. The funds that were
Republicans
intended to
desperately want
stabilize
passage.
American
But they
communities
lacked
during
the
a
60
domestic
votes
crisis
required to break
were
the
instead
stalemate.
used to
Which means
inflate foreign real
frustrations
estate
are just
markets.
boiling
And the
over.
catalyst for the current
Today,
national
you have
firestorm
28
actually
Republican
started online,
senators,
right?
people like
Yeah,
Pete Ricketts
really did.
and Cynthia
A
Lummis,
right-wing
demanding
YouTuber named
that the
Nick
Senate
Shirley
force a
traveled
grueling,
to Minnesota
physical,
and released a
talking
viral
filibuster.
video
They want to
investigating
force
these
Democrats
daycare
to
and food
stand on the
programs.
floor and
He
talk
actually
until their
filmed
vocal
the empty
cords just
parking
give out.
lots
And if
and
that
confronted
fails,
the
they want
program
to break the
operators.
standing
Right.
rules of the
That
Senate
grassroots
entirely
viral
to force a
exposure
final vote.
bypassed
And the real
traditional
shocker
media
dropped
entirely
just a few
and
days ago.
immediately caught
Senator
the attention
John
of the second
Cornyn,
Trump
a
administration,
man who fiercely
forcing
defended
this
the old Senate
immediate
rules for his
hardline
entire
response.
career.
And the
Just
response from the federal
published
government
this
has been highly
fiery
aggressive.
op-ed.
The
Right,
Trump
saying
administration
Republicans must
initiated
act
what they're
now to
calling
get this bill
Operation
passed.
Metro
Yeah, he said they had to
Metro
deal
surge,
a
yeah.
fatal
They
blow to the
deployed
rules,
2,000
which instantly
immigration
triggered
and
a massive
customs
public
enforcement
call-out from
personnel
former Senator Joe
directly
Manchin.
into Minnesota.
Manchin slammed Cornyn
This isn't
online
just an
for,
FBI
well, a
white-collar
massive
task
flip-flop.
force.
Because the
This
rules of
is
the
a
Senate
massive
are quite
deployment
literally
of
hanging by a thread
ICE
right now. I mean, the
agents
decisions made in the
targeting
next
the
few days will
networks,
dictate how
facilitating the
American laws are
international
written for
movement
the
of
next
these
century.
stolen funds.
But
Welcome
they
to
didn't
this
just
deep
send
dive.
the agents.
Today,
they completely
we have a
hit the
custom
brakes
mission
on the
tailored
money.
just
The
for
Trump
you.
administration
We're going to
froze
explore
all
the
federal child care
swashbuckling,
payments to the
pirate-filled
state of
origins
Minnesota
of the filibuster.
pending a
It
full
is a crazy
investigation
history.
into
It
the
really
fraud
is.
networks.
That's right. We'll also break
Which
down the
brings up an
terrifying
incredibly
parliamentary
difficult
weapon
reality.
known as the
Freezing
nuclear
billions
option.
of dollars in
And
federal
finally,
money
we
is a
will
massive
unpack a
blunt instrument.
mind-bending
It's freezing
mathematical
all this
concept
money, hurting the
called the
innocent
Manchin
single mothers who
paradox.
actually
Right,
rely
which proves
on
exactly why
subsidized daycare
politicians
so they can
use
go to
gridlock
work.
as a
It's a
highly
huge question.
calculated
Are legitimate care
mathematical
providers going
strategy.
bankrupt
So,
because the federal
by the
government
end of
is
this
just trying to starve
conversation,
out the criminals?
you will
I mean,
hold
is
the
shutting
secret
down down the entire
decoder ring
system,
for
really
the chaos
only
you see on the
mathematical way
news.
to stop the
You
bleeding.
will understand
that
the hidden
tension
game
is the
theory
central debate
that
occurring right
drives
now.
these
Right.
high-stakes
Critics of the freeze
showdowns.
argue
Absolutely.
that it
Okay, let's
inflicts
unpack
severe
this.
collateral
Before we
damage
can
on the
truly
most
vulnerable
grasp the physical
citizens,
threats and the
and
massive
it
stakes
penalizes
of this
honest
2026
providers for the
FZB
failures
America
of
Act
state
standoff.
auditors.
We really need to
However,
look at what the
if we
filibuster actually
synthesize
is.
the
And more
broader
importantly, how it
right-wing
started.
perspective driving this
Because it
policy,
wasn't designed
their
this way by
argument
the
is
founders,
structurally
right? Like
absolute.
this wasn't in the blueprint.
Not at
You
all.
cannot
If you
keep
read the U.S.
pouring water
Constitution, you will
into a
not
bucket
find the
with
word
a
filibuster
massive hole in
anywhere in the
bottom.
text.
Yeah,
It isn't
nowhere.
just a leaky bucket, though.
The
bottom has
Constitution basically
completely
gives the
rusted
Senate
out.
the
Exactly.
authority to set its
From
own
the
internal
conservative
rules.
viewpoint,
So back in
the
1789, during the very first
non-negotiable
sessions,
duty of the
debates
government
ended with just a
is to
simple
protect
majority
the
vote.
taxpayer from
Okay, so
systemic exploitation.
51 votes
Right.
And you're done. They argued
Exactly.
that the Rawls
But there was
administration
this
demonstrated
massive
an
loophole.
absolute failure
They
to secure
never
the financial
codified a
infrastructure.
specific procedure to
Because
force
the scale
a vote
of the
to
fraud
happen
within the
if
diaspora
someone
community
simply
was so
refused to
vast,
stop talking.
and because the money was
Ah.
hemorrhaging overseas
So without a
at such a
mechanism
rapid
to cut off
pace,
debate,
the federal government viewed the
politicians
freeze
figured out
not
they
as a
could just,
punishment,
you know,
but as a
hold the floor
mandatory
hostage.
quarantine.
They did.
The quarantine.
We actually
That
have
makes sense.
diaries
To
from
them,
the
you
very
have to
first session
completely
of the
dismantle
Senate.
and rebuild the
Pennsylvania
infrastructure
Senator
before
William
you can
McClay
safely
wrote down a
reintroduce a
sheer
single drop of
frustration
funding.
that senators
So,
from Virginia
let's
were
trace the full
intentionally
arc of
talking
the
away
failure
clock.
we
Just to
extracted
make sure
from
a
the court
specific bill
documents and the
couldn't
political
pass.
analysis
Right.
today.
They
Okay.
literally weaponized
Fraudsters
the clock.
identified
I mean,
an
if they were holding the
unprotected
legislative
state
process
system.
hostage,
They
it makes perfect sense
ruthlessly
why the press
exploited
eventually
emergency
started calling them
protocols.
pirates.
They stole
Which
billions
brings
in your
us to the
taxpayer
actual
money
word
and
filibuster.
laundered it
Yeah, it's
internationally
easily one of the
to
strangest
purchase
words in American
luxury real
politics.
estate,
So where does it
sports
come
cars,
from?
vacations.
The etymology is fascinating.
When the federal
honestly.
government
The
finally
term really
dismantled
took
the
hold in
network,
the 1850s.
federal judges
It
issued
comes from the
shockingly
Dutch word
short prison
freebeuter
sentences.
and the Spanish
And that
word
compounding failure
filibustero,
triggered a
which
massive
translates
federal
directly to
freeze
freebooter or
and an
pirate.
aggressive
Yes.
immigration crackdown.
Is
Specifically,
a
the
compounding
mercenaries
cascade of
and
systemic
pirates who
vulnerabilities.
raided
The
Caribbean
failure of
islands
one
and Latin
institution
American
inevitably
countries
forces
during
a
that
drastic
era.
overcorrection.
So they were
by
calling
another.
these distinguished
Exactly.
senators
And the reason you
pirates.
need to pay attention
Pretty
to
much.
this isn't just the
The
political
term entered
drama,
the political
it is your
lexicon
hard-earned
because
tax
observers
dollars.
recognized
Your
the
daily
behavior.
labor-funded
Senators
luxury
who
honeymoons
talked
in
for
the Maldives
hours
and
were
beachfront
literally
apartments in
hijacking
Turkey
the Senate
simply
floor.
because
Like
government
taking the government
bureaucrats were
hostage,
too
just like a
paralyzed
pirate
by
taking
political
over a ship.
optics to check the receipts.
So let's
It's a tough
track
pill
how
to
the
swallow.
Senate tried to fight
And
off
that
these
leaves us with
legislative
one final
pirates.
very serious
Because as the
question for
country
you to
grew,
consider as
I mean,
these
you couldn't just have
investigations
one
unfold.
person shut down
What's
the
that?
entire government
When a
for weeks
government
on end.
decides
No,
that
you
being,
couldn't.
quote,
But it took a
trusting
long time to build
is
a
more
defense.
important
By
than
the
actually
early 20th
verifying where
century,
billions
these
of dollars
marathon
go,
speeches
does
became
that system simply
catastrophic
become a
for a
magnet for
modernizing
criminals?
nation.